Well, I'm going to jump right in, and that's completely appropriate for this topic. Today's topic is swim! And I know summer is over, so let's not appropriate this to a summertime topic. There are trends that happen in the religious world. And it kind of filters down among the congregation. It kind of filters down into the worship. It filters down into the sermon topics. And in being in the pastorate, you kind of hear what these trends are, and you can kind of, jump on board, or you're like, no, I'm just sticking with what I know. There has been a trend like of 24/7, and we honestly have had people come in here and they say, are you doing 24/7 prayer? Well, and if we say, no, we're not, they say, oh, you have to do it. They like come here and they give us directive. Oh, you have to do it. That's what everyone is doing. Well, I've never been one of those who wants to jump on board and say, oh, everyone's doing it, I have to do it. There's been harps and bowls. Everyone, you have to do harps and bowl worship. That's what it's all about. It's from King David, and that is the way you do true worship. But now people aren't really so much on that bandwagon. So what happened? Was it not the way David did it? Why do these trends come and go? There was the fivefold ministry, and everyone was preaching on the fivefold ministry. There was also, a big one, double portion. Everywhere you went, people were praying, and I see that the Lord is giving you a double portion. I don't know if that meant you were supposed to gain weight or what, but it was a trend. It was a big thing. One of those trends was being in the river of God. And all these songs, the song that we started with, the two songs that we started with, talk about being in the river of God. So what happened to the river? Why are we not talking about being in the river anymore? Does the river, did it dry up? Where was our river? Where did it go? What's the story on the river? And why are we not trying to be in the river anymore? So, I was just given that word that we need to talk about the river of God again. Where did it go? And so I looked at the book of Ezekiel, and you think Revelations is crazy to read, and it is. The book of Ezekiel is really bizarre. Just go back and read it. It's like some kind of 60s LSD trip. If you want to take God out of it. It's crazy. But when you break it down, when you study it, it is divided in 3 parts. And the first one, they're all prophetic. The words that were given to Ezekiel. The first section, which is 1 through 29, chapters 1 through 29, it's about the prophecies against Judah and Jerusalem. We're not going to go into that. Then the chapters 25 through 32, they're prophecies against the foreign nations. And then chapters 33 through 48 that's where we really want to be. Hope and salvation. And that's where we get in the river. It's about the river, and it is so awesome when you read it with the mindset of, okay, what does it mean to be in the river of God? First, though, because Ezekiel is so crazy, I'm not saying he's crazy, the imagery is all so bizarre. I wanted to read just from the 2nd chapter of Ezekiel, and it's just a little piece of it. But for me, it gives a really clear picture of what happens sometimes when God speaks to you. It is so well articulated when God comes upon you and people say, I heard God's voice. When Moses sees, that God is, hiding him, and Abraham is kept from killing his son. They hear God's voice, and they all hear it in a little bit different way. They see a burning bush, and that is speaking to them. That's God's voice speaking to them. They hear the ram in the thicket. That's God's voice. But the way that Ezekiel articulates it, and this is not really about the river, but it gives us a picture of what does it mean to hear God's voice. And it colors everything else that happens in Ezekiel. Second chapter of Ezekiel. And he said to me, Son of man, stand on your feet, and I will speak to you. You see how it's just like, this is what happens when I hear God's voice. I will speak to you. Then the Spirit entered me when he spoke to me and set me on my feet. And I heard him who spoke to me. And he said to me, Son of man, I am sending you to the children of Israel, to a rebellious nation that has rebelled against me. They and their fathers have transgressed against me to this very day, for they are impudent and stubborn children. I am sending you to them, and you shall say to them, Thus says the Lord God. As for them, whether they hear or whether they refuse, I love the way God speaks to him. It doesn't matter if they accept it or don't accept it. It matters that you are obedient, right? Whether they hear or whether they refuse, for they are a rebellious house. Yet they will know that a prophet has been among them. And you, son of man, do not be afraid of them, nor be afraid of their words. Though briars and thorns are with you, and you dwell among scorpions. I want to interject this. I have a friend who moved from here to Arizona. I've never been in Arizona before. There are all kinds of things she's getting exposed to. How many have seen, like, in the wild, seen a scorpion? I don't know. A couple people? So she said in Arizona, the scorpions like to go in the house like crickets. And she said one of the places they like to hide, this is so disgusting, is behind the towels.
Oh, no.
And she said, you'll hear very often people reach for a hand towel to dry their hands, and they get stung. Isn't that horrible? I think I would just like drip dry for the rest of my time in Arizona. So scorpions. You dwell among scorpions. Do not be afraid of their words or dismayed by their looks. They are a rebellious house. You shall speak my words to them, whether they hear or whether they refuse, for they're rebellious. But you, son of man, hear what I say to you. Do not be rebellious, like that rebellious house. Open your mouth and eat what I give you. So it's such a fatherly way that these words of prophecy and these directives are given to him. It's not like he sets them up, okay, go there and, they will set out the royal red carpet for you. And he said, it's going to be hard. It's not about that. It's about you doing what I ask you to do. So everything else in Ezekiel, keep that in mind. So in the second chapter, we see what it's like, at least for Ezekiel, to have the Spirit of God come upon him and how he hears God's voice. I really think that he kind of demystifies hearing God's voice. And then we get into that third section, the prophecies of hope and salvation. And we're starting chapter 47. Then he brought me back to the door of the temple. You should go back and read Ezekiel. It's a long chapter, and he is walking them through a long book. He's walking them through the whole time, and Ezekiel continues to just follow the Spirit of God. He brought me back to the door of the temple, and there was water flowing from under the threshold of the temple toward the east. For the front of the temple faced east. The water was flowing from under the right side of the temple, south of the altar. He brought me out by way of the north gate and led me around on the outside to the outer gateway that faces east. And there was water running out on the right side. And when a man went out to the east with a line in his hand, he measured 1,000 cubits, and he brought me through the waters. The water came up to my ankles. Again, he measured 1,000 and brought me through the waters. So he's measuring out from the bank, 1,000. Stand here. 1,000. Stand here. The water came up to my knees. Again he measured 1,000 and brought me through. The water came up to my waist. Again he measured 1,000. And it was a river that I could not cross, for the water was too deep, water in which one must swim, a river that could not be crossed. He said to me, Son of man, have you seen this? Then he brought me and returned me to the bank of the river. When I returned there along the bank of the river, there were many trees, and on one side and on the other. Then he said to me, this water flows toward the eastern region, goes down into the valley and enters the sea. When it reaches the sea, its waters are healed. And it shall be that every living thing that moves, wherever the rivers go, will live. There will be a great multitude of fish, because these waters go there, for they will be healed. And everything will live wherever the river goes. Does it make a little more sense why people were saying, oh, we need to be in the river of God? You see, here are all these wonderful things that are happening. It shall be that fishermen will stand by it from En-Gedi to En-Eglaim. They will be places for spreading their nets. Their fish will be of the same kinds as the fish of the great sea, exceedingly many. But its swamps and marshes will not be healed. They will be given over to salt. Along the bank of the river, on this side and that, will grow all kinds of trees used for food. Their leaves will not wither. Their fruit will not fail. They will bear fruit every month because their water flows from the sanctuary. Their fruit will be for food, and their leaves for medicine. Then he brought me back, is how he starts this. Then he brought me back to this place. Brought him back to return. The last chapters are about hope and salvation. After he said, these houses are evil, they're in rebellion. You need to speak to the nations. And then he said, but there is a hope and there is salvation. The final vision, Ezekiel sees this new commonwealth, this new community. And it's centered around a temple in Jerusalem. Some have called this the third temple. That doesn't really matter for this sermon, but it's where God's Shekinah, his divine presence, that word Shekinah, his divine presence, it is the opposite of kabod, which means the glory of the Lord has departed. His divine presence will return. So I want you to think of the river. Yes, we're using it as a metaphor, but I want you to really dig into how it can be more than a metaphor. What are the things that we know about a river, and why would God use this? with Ezekiel to talk about these things. The river is never still. A river that doesn't move would be a lake or something like that. A river is never still. The river has to move. It has to move. The river is wild. There is life. The river gives life. It's never still, and because it's continuing to move, it continues to bring nutrients. It brings life with it. The river is intense. If you've been whitewater rafting, you will know you have no power over a river. It is intense. It has power. They build hydroelectric dams because there is power in the river. And the other thing is that the river modifies. It changes things. A river decides to go this way. If it goes this way long enough, the whole bank is going to change. It changes rock, it changes ground, it changes trees, it changes communities. If a river decides to dry up going into one community, I mean, now, of course, we have sewage systems and things like that, but a river decides to move. Life moves with the river. So what happens if you have a river that doesn't do those things? A river that's still, a river that's not wild, it's not bringing life. A river that just kind of like, a river that doesn't change anything. I'm going to read this for you. When I was working on the sermon, the Lord just spoke to me, dead river. And I said, I don't really know what that means. So I Googled Dead River. There are actually a lot of towns named Dead River, but I just went down the page, scrolled until I got to a place that said it was explaining a dead river. Now, there was a Dead River, Wyoming, for example, and I didn't go to the Wikipedia page of Dead River, Wyoming. I went to the first place where it looked like it was going to explain Dead River to me. And you guys, I think this is not by accident, but listen to this. And I'm just taking this out of the page. A few years ago, the government of the Philippines acknowledged that the Pasig, how do you say it? P-A-S-I-G. Pasig River is biologically inactive. You guys know this river, right? Yeah. Biologically inactive. The first signs of deterioration of river quality began appearing as early as the 1930s, when fish migration to and from Laguna Lake began to diminish. Through the years, there was a marked decline in bathing and washing activities. By the 1980s, the country's most important waterway was transformed into a national symbol of pollution. The pollution of the Pasig River by industrial sources is significant, but neglected. Even though government documents talk about toxic waste minimization and prevention, virtually nothing has been done to prevent it. Now, I don't want you to think that I am bashing the Philippines at all. This is what really stuck with me when I read that, and I just took that verbatim. It was off of this ecological site. When I read that, in my mind, I turned that around to talk about the church. And it could be rewritten. A few years ago, the DCBC, and I took the words and I just replaced them. The DC Baptist Convention acknowledged that CCBC was biologically inactive. The first signs of deterioration began appearing as early as the 1970s, when visitors began to diminish. Remember, in the river, fish began to diminish. Through the years, there was a marked decline in worship activities. By the 1980s, CCBC was a symbol of decline in the American church. The pollution of the church by things of the world is significant and neglected. Even though the church's talk about decline prevention, virtually nothing had been done to prevent the suffering. I just took those words and I rewrote it to talk about the church. And that is exactly what it sounds like. Because I didn't want to leave you with the feeling like, oh, the poor Philippines, now we have to worry about their dead river. They are doing something about it. They went on to say that the river was a legacy, that it's a very important part of the Philippines. And it says, being older than all the cities surrounding it, the Pasig River in itself is history. It has seen Chinese ceramics dating from the 14th century and the Second World War. The river used to be the focal point for development and historical events in Manila. Sadly, it started deteriorating in the 1930s and is now biologically dead. They say that rivers reflect our health as a society. Listen to these words and listen to it as if they're talking about the church. It really makes you think. If this is the case, then we're in big trouble, but it's not yet too late. There is a law in the Philippines that protect the riverbanks, a decree instituting a water code, thereby revising and consolidating the laws governing the ownership, appropriation, utilization, exploitation, development, conservation, and protection of water resources. And then it goes on to talk at length about the solution to the problem and how they're correcting the river sewer system. Are you guys aware of the problems with the river? Yeah. And did you know that they're really trying to make it all right? Water? Yeah. So, for those of you, you could all hear what you're saying. So you can notice now that they're paying attention because it's life. Yeah, and that's what the church should be. It should be life. Many of you do not know this, but from the time I was 16 until I was 25, every summer I was a lifeguard. So I know a lot about swimming. So, what's the deal about swimming in the river? How do we correct our problem? Does it have to do with our reluctance to be in the river? Why are people afraid to swim? The same reasons as why they don't want to come closer to God. It's not about coming to this church. Don't read it like, oh, that's where the river is. We have to go to the river at CCBC. It's not about that. It's about getting closer to God. Why are people so hesitant to do that? I think, just like in swimming, people don't like to feel out of control. I won't have you raise your hands, but there are some adults who don't know how to swim. And the older you get, the more fearful you are. My mother never learned to swim. She said because her brothers tried to drown her in the river when she was growing up. I don't know whether that's true or not, but yes, that would be a deterrent. And it is a deterrent for people to come and get closer to God if they've been hurt in a church. That's just like a little brother taking you to the river and dunking your head underwater. That's what people have felt sometimes when they come into a church and they get hurt. So there are some people who just don't like the feeling of out of control when they're swimming. Their weight feels different, their balance feels different. They don't know how. They're past the age, they're not a 7-year-old who can go to a swimming class. I always remember this really odd situation. We had this woman in our church, Roxy Montgomery, and she was older, and we were at this restaurant celebrating with one of our former members. He's now passed. He lived to be 100, though, so he had a great life. Ralph Weiser. And you know how women go to the bathroom together? Well, for some reason, I'm sorry, Mitzi's not here so I can embarrass her. Mitzi and Roxy and I all went to the bathroom together. And so we're stall to stall to stall, 3 stalls across. And Roxy was talking about the person that used to teach Sunday school here. And she said, yeah, when I go to that class, she said, sometimes I don't even feel saved. And that has always stuck with me. How many times do people come into church and people say things off the cuff, or maybe the pastor says something, but it makes the person feel like, I'm not safe here. And she had stopped going to the Sunday school because he was just like accusatory and, you know, if you don't do this and you don't do this, then you're not saved. That's sad. Some people don't like swimming because it just so gets their hair messed up and they don't want to do all of that. Sometimes it's just inconvenient. Oh, I have to drive, I have to go here, I have to go to the locker room, I have to bring And those are all reasons why people don't get closer to God. Oh, it might get messy. He might have me do weird things. It's inconvenient. I've got my Sunday Washington Post and leftover Chinese from last night. I don't even have to get out of bed. You know, it's inconvenient. And the worst thing about learning to swim or getting closer to God is when someone tries to drag you into it. Was anyone here taught how to swim? And it does happen. Because somebody threw them into the water. Do you have any traumatic remembrance of being thrown into the water and you didn't know how to swim? It's a horrible feeling. And that's a horrible thing to do to someone with God, too. Come on, I'm taking you to church. What is church about? I don't know. Just come in, have fun. When you learn how to swim, there's great freedom in the water. You know, I have bad joints, and when I get in the water, my joints don't hurt, I'm practically weightless. I can move faster than I can just walking. And everybody looks goofy. I don't know if women have this thing that happens, like if you're going to look for a new bathing suit, and it's still like March or April, and so your skin is, you know, it hasn't seen any of the light. For those of us who are pale, we look really pale in those retail dressing rooms. And you try on a bathing suit, it's like, I can't wear this. But somehow, when everyone gets out there at the pool, or at the beach, or at the river, none of that matters. And that's what it should be like in the river of God. That you should just come in, it's like, oh, it didn't matter that I didn't know what the dress code was there. It shouldn't matter. When you allow yourself to shed all of those things that keep you out of swimming, of being in the river of God, you realize that it's totally worth it. In the river of God, you have a lifeguard that's always on duty. God is your lifeguard. He is always on duty. lifeguards are always given, do you know what that thing is?
Whistle.
They're always given a whistle. And most of the time, you're yelling, "Don't run! Don't run!" Because you don't want kids to, you've seen people, kids will run and they'll, cut their, I think most little boys have a cut on their chin right here. I think it's from running on wet pool decks. But you have an eternal lifeguard who's going to stop you from running. That's that voice. That's that Spirit of God. Even said to Ezekiel, they may refuse. They may appear like a pack of scorpions. But it's okay. He is the eternal lifeguard. He is guarding you for eternity. Let me go back to Ezekiel. And we're almost done here, but I want to go back. When he talks about going ankle deep, and then knee deep, and then waist deep, what does that really mean? What is he showing Ezekiel? Even before I had studied the chapter, about 10 years ago, I had a vision. And I'm not saying I'm Ezekiel, but I had a vision. And it was people standing on the banks of a river. And they were like differing degrees in the water and out of the water. And some were really close, and some were really far away. And so I was just questioning, when you see something from God, you're like, okay, that's great. I'm not a visual artist. I can't that must be a picture I'm supposed to paint. I don't even know what it means. What does it mean? And here's what God showed me that vision meant. And then when I read Ezekiel, it's like, oh, yeah. God is the same. He is the Alpha and the Omega. He can speak to you just like he spoke to Ezekiel. And so here's what he showed me. I was judging people. Because if this is our river here, I was looking at people and saying, wow, they're not even getting wet. They must not, blah, blah, blah. Wow, they're really afraid. I'm not even going to talk to them about Jesus because they're unreachable. Then they had people that were like, you know how like a river has like a tree line? There were people like standing all the way back in the trees. And then I got this. You can call it revelation, but it's more like condemnation, although there's no condemnation in the Lord. But that's how it felt. It's like, oh, I was so wrong. Because there were people who were standing here on the riverbank, and they were just going. And they'd been standing there for years. And they were, oh, I'm too stressed to be blessed. They had all the right little terms that they were supposed to use, but they were just sticking in their toe. Yep, I go to church. I go to church every Sunday. And then there were people that were like sitting up here, sitting on the bank. I thought, well, they're just watching. And the Lord said, you don't know how quickly someone can get in the water. And some people that are just watching are just waiting for an invite. Oh yeah, sure. I'll come in. And they're in. And that person's still standing there sticking their toe in. We can't judge how far a person is, because it can happen like that. The person standing in the tree line, haven't you ever seen like a teenager go way back, and they run and they jump. And where do they end up? They have to swim. You can't look at someone and say, they're unreachable. Maybe they're standing back there because they're going to get a running jump. When they're ready to be in the river, when they're ready to hear the voice of God, they're just going to run into it. We all need to find that place where we can enter in to the river of God. And it's not about, honestly, you'll see some, like if you go on YouTube and you see some of these river worship videos, and you'll see people like doing crazy things. It's not about that. It's not about how you act. It's about where you are. You go where you meet God. You need to be willing to swim when you finally let go, when you finally are walking in and it gets so deep that you have to start swimming. That's when you rely on God. You tell me where I need to go. If everyone will stand up, we're going to celebrate communion. And because I have kind of made this the river of God right here, I'm inviting you to swim in the river of God. We will all come up here. And I want to conclude with this. As you're walking, you can come walk. Just this morning, the Lord was talking to me about gravitational pull. You know, the rivers and the oceans, all the water, the entire earth is operated by a gravitational pull. And I sometimes feel a gravitational pull along with that. And I said, so where am I being pulled? That pulls me out of the river of God. And the Lord said this morning to me that I allow myself to be pulled into expectation. This is a word for you guys. This is a word for you guys. That He will pull you out of the river of God into a place because it's expectation. That's not how a river operates. A river goes where it wants to go. And I know that people say things like, well, she's a pastor. Why is she up singing worship? Because that's what the Lord has in my heart. But that's not expected. You know, you're the pastor now. You're not expected to lead worship. Oh, but I have to be a part of worship. But that's not expected. If you do things that are expected of you, that is pulling you out of the river of God. Does that mean anything to anyone else? If you're a woman and they say, you're a woman, you're not expected to do that. I'm not expected to dance. But I do. That's what keeps me in the river. And so I'm just giving that to all of you. Those expectations, you make sure you do what God is expecting you to do. Amen? Yes. I'm going to hand this over to William. Because I expect him to lead us in